Imagine you're a highly respected 19th century medical professional.
Yeah.
You teach at a prestigious university, you're pioneering new surgical techniques, and you are genuinely just trying to save lives.
Right, doing important work.
Exactly. But to actually do your job, you have to commit this really gruesome felony in the dead of night. You have to hire criminals to literally dig up a freshly buried human body.
Oh, it's so dark.
It is. You smuggle it into your home, you dissect it, and then, because you are just terrified of the police, you literally hide the stripped human bones inside your bedroom wardrobe.
Yeah, right next to your winter coats.
Exactly. And today, we use that exact horrifying historical nightmare over morning coffee just to describe a local politician who maybe, didn't pay their taxes a decade ago.
The disconnect between the raw, visceral history of our language and the casual way we just sort of deploy it in a modern office is, honestly, it's staggering.
It really is.
We take these ancient high-stakes scenarios of survival, espionage, crime, and we just flatten them into idioms to describe an awkward Zoom meeting.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to decode a very specific, highly visual set of these linguistic artifacts for you. We're diving into a really fascinating educational transcript centered entirely on C2-level advanced English idioms that deal with confidentiality, gossip, and the unearthing of truth.
Which is such a rich area of language.
Oh, totally. And the source material makes this really compelling argument right off the bat, which is that human beings just find plain facts incredibly boring.
We really do.
Right, like stating, I am hiding information, or I heard a rumor, doesn't satisfy our psychological craving for drama. We are so obsessed with the mechanics of secrecy that we've essentially constructed this shadow language, a whole labyrinth of metaphors, just to avoid speaking directly.
Which tells us something really profound about the cognitive load of truth versus fiction. Direct language, the perfectly transparent exchange of data, requires vulnerability. It puts you on the record.
Oh, absolutely. You're exposed.
Exactly. But these idioms, they operate as a sort of linguistic shield. They allow native speakers to navigate these incredibly murky social and professional waters without ever having to explicitly state the plain, often very uncomfortable facts.
Yeah, you get to hide behind the imagery.
Right. And for anyone looking to truly master the English language, moving beyond just basic fluency means understanding these expressions not as quirky decorations, but as actual historical fossils. They show us how human behavior, particularly our deceptive behavior, has evolved over time.
I love that idea of a linguistic shield because, before a secret can be exposed or gossiped about, it first has to be physically contained, right?
Has to live somewhere.
Exactly. And the sources outline two incredibly distinct mechanisms for how we hide things right at the inception of a secret. We either keep it under wraps or we sweep it under the rug.
Yeah. And, the physical objects involved here really dictate the entire psychological intent of the concealment. Let's look at keeping something under wraps first.
Okay, let's do it.
The source traces this straight back to the Industrial Revolution and the world of physical manufacturing and transportation. Think of a 19th century workshop or the lead up to a grand public unveiling at a World's Fair.
Oh, like a giant exposition hall?
Exactly. Before a groundbreaking new invention, maybe one of the first experimental automobiles, or a massive, beautifully commissioned public sculpture, before it's ready for the public eye, it is physically covered.
Right. It's swathed in these massive, heavy, opaque canvas tarps, the literal wraps.
Yes, the wraps.
And the visual is just so striking to me because the wrap itself actually draws attention. If you see a massive object covered by a tarp in the middle of a room, you know something valuable is underneath.
You know it's there. You're not ignoring it.
Right. You aren't pretending the object doesn't exist. You are just restricting access to it. It's essentially the difference between wrapping a precious gift and hoarding trash. One is about protecting future value, and the other is about hiding present shame.
What's fascinating here is how the physical mechanisms of hiding actually dictate the modern corporate usage. The creators place these thick wraps over the object to protect the integrity of a future revelation. It's a physical barrier, but it's designed for a temporary state.
It's meant to come off eventually.
Exactly. And idiomatically, the source explains that to keep something under wraps has evolved to denote keeping a plan, a project, or proprietary information strictly confidential. Like a technology CEO might say, our engineers are developing a revolutionary new smartphone, but we need to keep the design under wraps until the December launch.
Yeah, the concealment is very strategic. It's highly protective.
It is. A CEO keeps the smartphone design under wraps proudly. But contrast that strategic protection with the second idiom, sweeping it under the rug.
Oh man, yeah, the source paints a very different picture here. It asks us to envision a housekeeper who is just fundamentally avoiding their core responsibility.
They're cutting corners.
Totally. They don't want to exert the actual effort required to gather up the dirt with a dustpan and permanently remove the mess from the environment. So they just take a broom and push all that loose dirt, dust, and debris underneath a large floor rug.
The motivation completely inverts here. The room now presents this illusion of cleanliness to a casual observer. The surface looks pristine.
But the mess is still there.
Right. It's festering in the dark, trapped right between the floorboards and the carpet.
And metaphorically, to sweep something under the rug means ignoring a problem, concealing a scandalous mistake, or hiding embarrassing behavior with the desperate hope that literally no one will ever lift the edge of that carpet.
Right, and the corporate example provided in the transcript is pretty chilling, actually. An accounting manager discovers missing funds and tries to sweep the discrepancy under the rug to avoid a massive audit and a public scandal.
Yeah, because they're terrified.
Exactly. They sweep missing funds under the rug out of absolute paralyzing fear. And, it's interesting because the temporal nature of these two physical hiding places dictates their usage. A tarp is inherently designed to be removed.
Right, there's a timeline for revelation.
Yes. The entire purpose of placing a canvas wrap over a statue is the anticipation of eventually pulling it off to thunderous applause. But a rug, however, is meant to stay flat on the floor permanently.
You walk over it. You put furniture on it.
You place heavy mahogany desks right on top of it.
Oh.
When you sweep dirt under a rug, the psychological intent is permanent, fearful concealment.
So I want you, the listener, to really reflect on your own workplace for a second. Which culture of secrecy dominates your office? When an issue arises in a boardroom, does leadership act like they are pulling a tarp over a masterpiece they are protecting? Or are they frantically looking for a rug to hide the institutional decay?
That's a great question, because if it's the latter, the source material takes us into significantly darker territory. Secrets swept under the rug rarely stay dormant.
No, they rot. They get worse.
They do. Which brings us back to that terrifying 19th century doctor we started with, and the concept of having a skeleton in the closet.
Oh, yes. This is where it gets really morbid.
The grim reality of medical history embedded in this phrase really cannot be overstated. So, during the 19th century, anatomists and medical schools faced this paralyzing bottleneck. They desperately needed human cadavers for dissection.
To, understand anatomy and actually advance surgical techniques.
Exactly. Without dissection, medicine stagnates entirely. However, the legal supply of bodies, which was almost entirely limited to the corpses of executed murderers, was just vastly insufficient to meet the demands of the booming medical schools.
The law essentially created a massive black market for human remains.
It really did. Driven by absolute professional necessity, doctors turned to illegal means. They hired these resurrection men, professional grave robbers.
The name alone, resurrection men.
Right. And these individuals would monitor funerals by day and then infiltrate the cemeteries in the dead of night to exhume fresh corpses, and they'd smuggle them back to the medical professionals for cash.
But it's the physical aftermath that created the idiom, right? Because once the doctor had the body and the dissection was totally complete, they couldn't just throw the remains out the window into the street.
No, they were left with the bones. The skeleton.
And because the entire enterprise was a severe felony, often punishable by imprisonment, they had to hide the evidence within their own domestic spaces. They literally hid human skeletons in the cupboards, the wardrobes, or the closets of their own homes.
The closet transformed from a space of domestic storage into a prison of profound guilt and terror. I mean, the doctor had to live every single day knowing that behind a thin wooden door lay the absolute proof of their criminality.
It's so dark, and I really have to push back on the way the transcript notes our modern usage of this phrase, though. Well, the example given is a journalist digging into a seemingly perfect presidential candidate's past to see if they have any skeletons in the closet. We use this phrase so casually today.
We really do throw it around.
Right. We use a term born from illicit midnight body snatching and the intense paranoia of keeping mutilated human remains in your bedroom just to describe finding out a politician had a messy divorce 20 years ago. The modern usage feels almost entirely divorced from the literal horror of the origin.
Yeah, we have certainly sanitized the imagery. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But if we look at the psychological pattern, the escalation actually makes perfect sense.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, think about the progression from the rug to the closet. A secret swept under the rug is usually a localized mistake. It's an error in judgment. A skeleton in the closet, however, represents a deeply embarrassing, shameful, or scandalous secret from your past that possesses the active power to permanently ruin your current reputation if it ever sees the light of day.
I see. It's like a dormant bomb.
A foundational lie. So the literal fear of a 19th century doctor facing imprisonment and societal ruin has smoothly evolved into a metaphor for modern reputational destruction. A secret swept under the rug is just a mistake, but a skeleton in the closet is a deeply scandalous secret.
So the secret is locked away. The canvas tarp is tied down, the rug is flat, the closet door is bolted shut. How do we, the outside observers, actually breach those defenses?
Because humans are relentlessly curious.
We really are, and our sources outline two very distinct methodologies for discovering hidden truths. We can either read between the lines, or we can be a fly on the wall.
Let's examine the active methodology first. Read between the lines pulls us right into the high-stakes world of cryptography and espionage. Imagine a spy during a major conflict, perhaps the Revolutionary War or World War II.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They need to transmit vital, sensitive intelligence back to their commanders. But they know their mail is being intercepted, opened, and read by enemy sensors.
Writing the truth plainly is basically a death sentence, so they write a decoy letter.
Exactly. A completely mundane correspondence to a fictitious aunt. You know, the weather is lovely, the harvest was plentiful, my health is adequate. The visible ink presents a narrative of total innocence.
But crucially, in the blank white spaces separating those lines of mundane text, the spy utilizes invisible ink, maybe an alum solution or citrus juice, to write the actual top-secret intelligence regarding troop movements or supply shortages.
The real truth is physically hiding in the negative space. The enemy sensor reads the visible ink, finds nothing objectionable, and passes the letter along.
And then the intended recipient receives it, applies a chemical wash or a heat source to the paper, and boom, the hidden message physically materializes right between the lines.
Right. And idiomatically, the source explains that to read between the lines is transitioned from a literal chemical process into a cognitive one. Today, it means looking for a hidden meaning, an unspoken truth, or a subtext that is not being explicitly stated.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the source contrasts this intensely active cognitive process with a totally different mechanism of discovery. The fly on the wall.
A completely different approach.
The transcript paints this picture of a tiny common housefly resting on the plaster of a room. It is so small, so completely insignificant, and so universally ignored that the human beings in the room don't even register its presence.
It achieves a state of practical invisibility.
Exactly. And because it is entirely ignored, that little fly gets to witness every unfiltered moment occurring in that room. The source defines this as having a deep voyeuristic desire to secretly observe a private, highly dramatic conversation without anyone knowing you're there.
The classic example is wishing you could be a fly on the wall, while two rival corporate directors have a massive screaming argument behind a closed boardroom door.
Right, and I love contrasting these two methods of discovery, because reading between the lines demands active intellectual deduction.
You really have to work for it.
You do. The transcript offers a great example. My boss said my presentation was very unique. Now, she didn't explicitly say it was terrible, but reading between the lines, interpreting her tone or subtle hints, I think she absolutely hated it.
You're scrutinizing body language, deciphering subtle word choices.
It is exhausting cognitive labor, but being a fly on the wall, that requires zero deduction. That is pure passive voyeurism. You don't want to analyze subtext. You want the raw, explicit drama served directly to your ears while you safely hide on the wallpaper.
Yet both idioms, despite their differing mechanics, reflect our fundamental craving to bypass the official narrative. Whether we are looking for unspoken truths or explicit drama, both reflect our deep craving to bypass the sanitized public story. We want undetected access to truth.
We want to sneak backstage, but let's say you aren't a skilled detective decoding subtext, and you don't possess the magical ability to shrink down into a fly.
Unfortunately, we do not.
Sometimes you don't have to seek the information out at all. The information finds you. It washes over the entire office. And our source text highlights one of the most famous idioms for how information moves when it's not strictly guarded, hearing it through the grapevine.
The historical origin of the grapevine is a brilliant case study. The source traces this idiom back to the mid-1800s in America, specifically tying it to the invention and rapid expansion of the telegraph system.
Which was a massive deal. Before this, information could only travel as fast as a horse could gallop or a train could steam. Suddenly, we had the ability to communicate instantly across vast distances.
It was the 19th century internet. It was an absolute paradigm shift. But we have to visualize what that infrastructure actually looked like as it was being hastily constructed. You had thousands of miles of physical wires being strung up on wooden poles, connecting remote towns.
And to the everyday people watching this unfamiliar infrastructure alter their horizon, the tangled, twisting, looping lines of wires suspended in the air closely resemble the tangled, chaotic vines of a grape plant.
Yes. They looked at this hyper-advanced technological marvel and immediately nicknamed it after a messy piece of agricultural flora, the grapevine.
The visual similarity birthed the nickname, but the idiom truly cemented its modern meaning during the chaos of the American Civil War, right?
Exactly. The source notes that during the Civil War, official military dispatches were often delayed, censored, or just completely inaccurate. Consequently, unofficial rumors, casualty reports, and raw gossip were constantly being passed informally along these telegraph lines by operators and citizens.
The official channels were failing, so the network was commandeered for unofficial truths. Therefore, today, hearing something through the grapevine means you received a piece of unverified gossip that was passed informally from person to person.
Like hearing through the grapevine that a colleague is going to be fired long before HR announces it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a brilliant irony. A piece of groundbreaking 19th century technology designed explicitly for precise official communication was immediately named after a tangled plant.
And subsequently became the ultimate metaphor for how unofficial rumors pass organically.
Right. The telegraph was built for absolute truth, but human nature co-opted it for gossip. A grapevine doesn't grow in a straight, engineered line. It twists, it branches off, it tangles. Gossip operates on the exact same principles.
I want you to really think about how this applies to your life today. When you hear about an unannounced promotion or a company bonus through the grapevine, it proves that human nature will always use the fastest available network for gossip.
The medium changes, but the behavior stays the same.
Exactly. Whether it's literal copper telegraph wires or an encrypted Slack channel, the chaotic behavior of the grapevine remains a constant. We simply cannot tolerate an information vacuum.
Which perfectly explains why secrets are so inherently fragile. The pressure of that information vacuum is immense. Eventually, despite all the tarps and rugs, the structural integrity of the secret fails.
It breaches containment. And when a secret finally ruptures, it is rarely a graceful process. The sources provide two incredibly famous, highly visual C2-level idioms for the exact moment. A secret is explicitly, but accidentally, exposed. Spill the beans and let the cat out of the bag.
The historical origins for these two phrases are remarkably vibrant. Let's analyze spill the beans. The source traces this all the way back to ancient Greece. When citizens needed to vote on a crucial issue, they didn't fill out paper ballots. They used physical objects.
Specifically, beans are small pebbles. A white bean signified a yes vote, and a black bean signified a no.
Right, and to maintain the confidentiality of the voting process, they would drop their chosen bean into a specialized opaque clay jar. The jar physically concealed the public's will.
The jar holds the secret, unless human error intervenes.
The source explains that if someone clumsily knocked that clay jar over, spilling the beans all over the stone floor, the secret vote was instantly and visually revealed to everyone present. The ratio of white to black beans was suddenly public knowledge,
ruining the whole process. So, to spill the beans means to accidentally or prematurely reveal secret information, like a little sister clumsily revealing a surprise birthday party.
Now, compare that ancient democratic mechanism with the second phrase, let the cat out of the bag. The source notes that this origin traces to 16th century England in a chaotic agricultural market.
A buyer approaches a vendor looking to purchase an expensive baby piglet.
The vendor, who is actively operating a confidence scam, takes the buyer's money and hands them a squirming, tied-up burlap sack, the bag. He assures the buyer a premium piglet is inside.
But the dishonest farmer has actually stuffed a worthless, aggressive, stray street cat into the squirming sack instead.
It's a complete fraud. The trick was exposed only when the buyer got all the way home, untied the knot, and literally let the cat out of the bag. The split second the feline escapes, the vendor's secret trick is undeniably exposed.
And today, letting the cat out of the bag often means exposing an intentional deception or a carefully hidden plan. I really have to point out the shared visual mechanics of these two C2 level idioms here.
Oh, the containers?
Yes, both involve a physical container, a rigid clay jar, a tied sack that is meant to hold something secret. And in both scenarios, the container is accidentally or carelessly opened. The physical vessel breaks.
The physical mechanics are nearly identical, but the tone of the exposures is so vastly different. Spilling the beans is often an innocent, clumsy accident. It stems from poor impulse control or overexcitement. There is no grand deception in knocking over a jar.
It's an honest mistake.
But letting the cat out of the bag. That often exposes an intentional deception. When you let the cat out of the bag, you aren't just revealing a fun surprise, you're exposing a coordinated strategy or a deliberate ruse.
Like a movie studio's secret celebrity cameo ruined in a live interview.
Exactly. The actor isn't just ruining a party, they are actively destroying a carefully constructed marketing strategy. Spilling the beans exposes an innocent secret. Letting the cat out of the bag exposes a lie.
That is an incredibly crucial nuance. And speaking of exposing a lie, what happens when the deception is undeniable? When the cat is out, the beans are everywhere, and there is nowhere left to hide. That brings us to our final stage, the inescapable truth and resolution.
The source text concludes the life cycle of a secret with two highly evocative idioms, caught red-handed and shed light on something.
Let's dive into caught red-handed, because the historical context here is arguably the most visceral in the entire transcript. It originates from an ancient Scottish legal term.
During the era of the royal forests, the king owned vast tracts of woodland, and illegally hunting the king's deer was a severe crime, but achieving a conviction was notoriously difficult.
You needed absolute physical evidence.
Specifically, the source states that convicting someone of illegally hunting the king's deer required them to be caught with the literal red blood of the animal still physically staining their hands.
You cannot talk your way out of having the king's deer's blood drying on your fingers. The physical reality overrides any excuse. Therefore, today, being caught red-handed means being apprehended at the exact moment you're committing a crime. So what does this all mean? Because just like with the skeletons in the closet, I have to push back on the severity of red-handed here.
But we've lowered the stakes again.
Drastically. The origin is a literal bloody crime against a king. But today, it's used for an employee caught on security cameras stealing office supplies or a student caught cheating. We went from royal blood to a stolen stapler.
We undeniably have. But I think what survives the journey is that core concept of undeniable evidence. It highlights undeniable evidence. When you are caught red-handed, the argument is instantly over. The secret is dead.
The secret is dead, and the shadow puppet show ends.
And that leads us to the final linguistic resolution, shedding light on something.
Yeah.
The transcript asks us to conceptualize this through the metaphor of walking into a pitch-black, confusing room where you are physically tripping over objects.
It's a state of total confusion.
But then, someone turns on a powerful lantern. They shed light across the space. Instantly, the shapes resolve. Idiomatically, to shed light on a mystery means to provide new information that makes a situation completely clear.
Like an ancient diary explaining how the pyramids were built.
Exactly. After a journey through dark closets, invisible ink, and tangled grapevines, the truth is finally achieved through sensory illumination. Providing new information strips away all the confusion and lies.
What an incredible linguistic life cycle we've just covered. From being covered in a canvas tarp to having a literal lantern shined upon it. Emphasizing how mastering these vivid expressions takes your English fluency to an absolute master level.
You aren't just memorizing vocabulary. You are absorbing centuries of human psychology regarding truth, shame, and deception.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. We noted at the beginning that the source text claims we use these idioms because simply saying, "I heard a rumor," is far too boring.
It is entirely too boring.
But look at how intensely dramatic these origins are. We are talking about grave robbers, wartime spies, bloody royal deer, and 16th century market scams. It's the peak of life or death drama.
The stakes couldn't be higher.
So here's my question for you to explore on your own. Are we keeping these ancient gruesome idioms alive because modern corporate life is actually quite mundane? Do we desperately crave the feeling of being a 19th century spy or an ancient Scottish outlaw just to make our everyday office gossip feel more exciting?
We borrow the trauma of the past to spice up the boredom of the present.
It's a completely fascinating way to look at how we speak. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring those hidden histories, keep questioning the words you use every day, and of course, keep reading between the lines.
We'll see you next time.
You know, there is this moment, and I mean, I'm certain you listening to this right now, you know exactly the feeling I'm about to describe.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you're just staring at this blank piece of paper. Maybe you've drawn a line right down the middle to make a pros and cons list. And on one side of that line is your current reality, right?
Okay.
The secure job, the predictable routine, the city whose streets you've just entirely memorized.
Right, the comfortable stuff.
Exactly. And on the other side is the great unknown. Maybe it's relocating to a whole new country, or I don't know, maybe it's finally resigning from that secure job to start the business you've been, visualizing for years.
Yeah, the dream.
Right. And in theory, you should feel entirely empowered by these incredible possibilities, but instead you feel, completely paralyzed. Like the weight of the choice just anchors you to the floor and your brain sort of just stops functioning.
It's a profound, almost physical paralysis, really. We operate under this societal assumption that having, infinite choices is the ultimate luxury.
Right, like being at a buffet.
Yeah, exactly. But the cognitive neuroscience of decision-making tells us a very, very different story. In those high-stakes moments, the sheer gravity of a massive life choice feels, less like freedom and significantly more like a trap.
Oh, wow. A trap.
Yeah, because human beings possess this deeply ingrained evolutionary fear of the unknown. Our brains are fundamentally predictive machines. They are wired to crave certainty and, pattern recognition.
So they want to know what happens next.
Exactly. So when you are confronted with a crossroads where the outcome is totally obscured, that paralysis isn't a character flaw. It is literally your brain's amygdala hitting the emergency brake to protect you from an unquantifiable threat.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we are not just talking about the bare-bones psychology of fear today. I was recently looking through some fascinating linguistic research, a deep breakdown of advanced English expressions specifically centered around risk, uncertainty, and decision-making.
Right, the language we use for it.
Exactly. And what we're going to do in this deep dive is explore how human beings have linguistically engineered frameworks to conceptualize that exact paralysis, those terrifying leaps, and those life-altering crossroads. Because, when you look closely at how we communicate, we almost never just say, I am scared.
No, rarely.
Right. Or I am incapable of making a decision. We use these highly visual, incredibly dynamic metaphors to navigate the sheer complexity of risk.
What's fascinating here is that language inevitably acts as a mirror for our psychological architecture. Saying, I'm terrified of making the wrong choice leaves us feeling incredibly exposed.
Oh, yeah. Super vulnerable.
Exactly. It admits a vulnerability that our social conditioning often tells us we have to hide. So instead of clinical descriptions of our anxiety, we paint pictures. We talk about fences and bridges and deep water.
Yeah, we hide behind the imagery.
Right. And by reverse engineering these specific metaphors, we can actually map out the human mind's complex and often, contradictory relationship with uncertainty.
And for you listening, think of this as a psychological blueprint. Understanding the architecture of these phrases allows you to articulate indecision, voice spontaneity, and declare absolute commitment with real precision.
It really does.
Yeah, whether you're in a boardroom negotiating some high-stakes merger or just sitting in a coffee shop having a deep conversation with a friend about your career, the imagery you deploy dictates how much command you have over the narrative of your own life.
It is the difference between simply transmitting information and actually controlling the framing of a situation.
Right.
When you tap into the cultural and historical resonance of these metaphors, you are speaking directly to the subconscious anxieties and, the exhilarations of the human experience.
So let's start right at the beginning of the decision-making cycle, because before anyone can take a risk, they have to confront their inability to make a choice. We start at the literal dividing line.
Fence.
Right. The research highlights this perfectly uncomfortable physical metaphor for being paralyzed by indecision, which is sitting on the fence.
The visual geometry of sitting on the fence is crucial to understanding why it resonates so deeply. You have a tall wooden fence, establishing an absolute binary dividing line between two completely separate spaces. Let's call them Field A and Field B.
Okay, Field A and Field B.
Right. And both fields represent mutually exclusive realities. You cannot exist in London and New York simultaneously. But because the fear of choosing the quote-unquote wrong field triggers that neurobiological emergency brake we mentioned earlier.
The amygdala response.
Exactly. You refuse to walk into either. You climb up and you perch yourself directly on top of the barrier.
Right, but, I mean, sitting on a sharp wooden fence is inherently agonizing. It's not a hammock.
No, not at all. And that physical discomfort is the entire point of the metaphor. It captures the psychological torment of cognitive dissonance. We frequently trick ourselves into believing that neutrality is a safe harbor.
Like we're protecting ourselves.
Yeah, we think that by delaying a decision, by refusing to plant our feet in field A or field B, we are preserving our options and protecting ourselves from failure. But the idiom brutally reminds us that remaining neutral is an agonizing state of being.
Because you're exposed.
You are exposed to the elements. You are entirely paralyzed. The indecision itself becomes a source of acute pain.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if I think about the physical mechanics of actually balancing on a narrow piece of wood, I immediately think of muscle fatigue.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah, like if you're perched up there trying to distribute your weight perfectly so you don't fall to the left or the right, your muscles are going to burn.
The tension.
The isometric tension is immense. You are expending a massive amount of energy just to remain totally static. And eventually, gravity is going to win. Your muscles will give out and the environment will force you down on one side or the other.
That's a very vivid way to look at it.
Right. So it makes me wonder, is sitting on the fence actually an active choice we make? Or is it merely a symptom of being so scared that we let circumstances eventually dictate our lives for us?
That tension of balance is a great way to frame it. I would argue it begins as an active choice. You consciously tell yourself, I need to gather more data, or, I want to keep my options open.
Which sounds very rational.
It sounds rational,
Yeah.
but very quickly that active choice degrades into a symptom of fear. Psychologists call this analysis paralysis. The longer you sit there, the more you realize you aren't actually processing new information. You're just delaying the inevitable out of a fear of regret.
Yeah.
The metaphorical splinters of indecision start to cause more psychological distress than the potential consequences of making the wrong choice.
Wow. I want you, the listener, to really apply this to your own history. Think about a time when you were pressured for a massive answer by a strict deadline. Let's say you have a lucrative job offer in another city, but you have to give them a firm yes or no by tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
That pressure is intense.
Have you ever felt those literal splinters of indecision, where the pressure of the impending deadline makes the neutrality physically unbearable? You can't just balance there forever because the external world demands an answer.
The impending deadline is exactly what makes the fence sharp. When you are on the fence, you surrender your agency to external forces.
Right, you're not in control anymore.
Exactly. If you sit there long enough, the job offer expires. The opportunity vanishes. You end up suffering all the pain of indecision without reaping any of the rewards of action.
Because you didn't actually choose anything.
Right. You haven't protected your options. You've merely allowed time to make the decision for you.
So if the physical and psychological pain of the fence is that unbearable, humans naturally look for an escape hatch. We want to find mental strategies to delay choices without feeling that immediate, localized pain.
We want to stretch it out.
Exactly. If the geometry of the fence represents immediate spatial paralysis, we have to stretch the geometry out. We move from a static barrier to a long journey, which brings us to the concept of temporal delay, which is crossing that bridge when you come to it.
The shift in imagery here is really profound. You are no longer trapped in a single agonizing spot. You are moving forward on a journey.
You have momentum.
Yes. And you're aware that, say, 10 miles down the road, there might be a broken bridge over a treacherous river.
Okay, so the danger is still there.
It's there, but the pragmatism of this idiom relies entirely on temporal discounting. Why flood your nervous system with cortisol over a broken bridge right now when you are still 10 miles away?
But let me challenge that. I mean, isn't crossing that bridge when you come to it just an intellectually dressed up way of justifying procrastination? Like, if I know the bridge is broken 10 miles away, shouldn't I stop and build a boat right now?
Well, in certain logistical scenarios, yes, absolutely, you should build the boat.
Yeah.
But from a psychological standpoint, this idiom is about cognitive load management.
Cognitive load.
Right. Our executive function has a strictly limited bandwidth. If we attempt to solve every hypothetical future crisis simultaneously, we trigger the exact same paralysis we experienced on the fence.
Oh, because we're overwhelmed.
We become so overwhelmed by future variables that we cease functioning in the present.
Ah, so it's a prioritization mechanism.
Precisely. By saying, We will cross that bridge when we come to it. You are acknowledging the risk. You aren't living in denial about the river, but you are strategically compartmentalizing the anxiety.
Putting it in a box for later.
Right. You are utilizing the distance as a psychological shield. It allows you to maintain forward momentum on the immediate tasks, reserving your cognitive resources to deal with the bridge only when and if it actually materializes.
Only when and if. That is a massive distinction, because maybe you walk those 10 miles and you discover the local town fixed the bridge yesterday. Or maybe the river dried up entirely. If you had spent the last 3 days agonizing and building a boat you had to drag behind you, all of that energy would have been entirely wasted on a phantom problem.
Exactly. It is a defense against the human tendency to catastrophize. Catastrophizing assumes the worst possible future scenario is a guaranteed reality.
Which it rarely is.
Right. This idiom gently pulls us back into the present moment, asserting that we can trust our future selves to handle the problem when the variables are actually visible.
Okay, so that handles a specific, identifiable future problem. But human communication has developed another strategy that pushes this even further. It shifts from delaying a decision about a specific bridge to rejecting the need for a strict itinerary entirely.
A very different approach.
Yeah, we move out of the visual world of distance and into the auditory world of music, with the concept of playing it by ear.
The origins of playing it by ear offer a brilliant contrast in how humans process information and, navigate reality. It stems from the dichotomy between classical music and folk or jazz traditions.
Oh, I love this comparison.
In classical music, performance relies heavily on rigid, preconceived sheet music. The musician knows exactly what note comes next, the precise tempo, and how the entire orchestra will respond. It is a fully deterministic map.
Right. If you deviate from the sheet music in a symphony, it's a mistake. The plan is the absolute authority.
Correct. But musicians who play by ear operate without that deterministic map.
Yeah.
They don't have sheet music. They are listening to the harmonic environment in real time, spontaneously generating notes that fit the evolving context of the song.
So they're just reacting.
They're reacting to the reality of the moment rather than trying to force the moment to conform to a pre-written document.
I see how this translates to modern life. We use it constantly for minor logistics, like, I'm not sure when my meeting ends, so let's skip the dinner reservation and just play it by ear.
Right. Very common.
You're letting the unfolding situation dictate your actions. But let me push back again, because I think there's a trap here. Does playing it by ear actually require more skill than following the sheet music? That's a great question.
Because if you have the map, execution is mechanical. You just follow the instructions. But if you are playing it by ear, whether in a jazz club or in a business negotiation, it implies you must be hyper-attuned to an incredibly complex, shifting environment.
Absolutely.
It sounds so casual when we say it, but doesn't it actually demand massive situational awareness?
That is a crucial distinction, and it touches on a major psychological misconception. We often confuse playing it by ear with passive drifting.
Right, just sort of floating along.
Passive drifting is just ignoring the future and hoping for the best. True improvisation, however, requires profound foundational knowledge.
So the jazz musician isn't just guessing.
No, a jazz musician can only play by ear because they have deeply internalized music theory, scales, and rhythm. They understand the underlying architecture so well that they can safely abandon the rigid plan.
So in a business or life context, you can only successfully play it by ear if you already possess a deep competence in what you are doing. Exactly. To adapt effectively in real time, you have to constantly read the room, assess changing variables, and update your mental models on the fly.
It sounds like a military strategy.
It is analogous to the O-Day loop used in military strategy. Observe, orient, decide, act. It is a continuous high-speed cycle of adaptation.
Observe, orient, decide, act. I like that.
So you are entirely correct. It isn't an excuse for laziness. It is an advanced strategy for maximum flexibility in highly unpredictable environments. You discard the fragile rigidity of a plan in favor of dynamic responsiveness.
But eventually, the jazz set ends.
It does.
Eventually, the long journey reaches the physical bridge. As much as we love the romance of spontaneous adaptation, it cannot sustain us forever. Spontaneity and delay eventually hit a wall.
The real world catches up.
Exactly. Sooner or later, preparation, boundary setting, and cold, hard rules must take over before a massive choice is finalized. Which leads us to a truly phenomenal historical concept for establishing the rules of engagement: drawing a line in the sand.
This is where the psychology of risk shifts from internal management to external authority.
Right.
The historical etymology here is magnificent. We have to look back to ancient history, specifically to an encounter between a Roman envoy named Popilius Laenas and King Antiochus V of Syria.
Okay, setting the scene.
Popilius was delivering demands from the Roman Senate, telling the king to withdraw his armies. The king tried to employ the exact strategies we just discussed. He tried to sit on the fence, he tried to delay, saying he needed to consult his advisors.
He wanted to cross that bridge when he came to it.
Exactly. But Popilius refused to allow the delay. He took his walking stick and physically drew a circle in the dirt, right in the sand, entirely surrounding the king.
Wow.
And then he delivered a stark ultimatum. The king had to give his final answer before stepping out of that circle.
The audacity of that is just incredible. You are physically trapping a monarch inside the geometry of a decision.
It is an unparalleled display of psychological dominance. And what makes this metaphor so enduring for us today is its profound paradox. Consider the physical nature of sand.
It's loose.
Sand is inherently temporary, fluid, and fragile. A slight breeze or the incoming tide will erase a line in the sand without a trace. It is the furthest thing from being carved in granite.
Yet, in that specific moment, it functions as an impenetrable wall.
Yes. In that highly charged moment, that fragile, temporary line serves as an absolute, unbreakable boundary. It is a definitive ultimatum.
So the line itself isn't strong.
Right, the impermanence of the sand actually serves to highlight the immense willpower of the person drawing the line. The boundary has no structural integrity of its own. It only exists, and it only holds weight because the person drawing it possesses the sheer resolve to enforce it.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. The strength isn't in the sand, the strength is in the psychology of the person holding the stick. If we map that onto modern life, it's like the CEO who tells a chronically late supplier, if you miss one more shipment, the contract is terminated.
Perfect example.
The CEO is forcing this issue. They are declaring an end to ambiguity. They are saying, I am no longer sitting on the fence, and I am no longer letting you play it by ear. We have reached the absolute limit of my tolerance.
It represents a critical psychological transition from passive observation to active control. When you draw a line in the sand, you are forcing the environment, or the people within it, to conform to your risk tolerance.
You're setting the rules.
You are taking ownership of the parameters of the crossroads.
So drawing a line in the sand is a mechanism for controlling external variables, like the foreign king, the unreliable supplier, maybe a toxic relationship. But before we take a massive risk, we also have to assess and control our internal vulnerability.
Yes, our own exposure.
We have to limit our own exposure to ruin. And to describe that, human language utilizes a metaphor deeply rooted in ancient agriculture, which is putting all your eggs in one basket.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this phrase is the foundational axiom of risk management, behavioral economics, and systems engineering.
All from some eggs.
Exactly. The visual is deceptively simple, yet it perfectly illustrates the concept of catastrophic systemic failure. Imagine a farmer who has spent hours carefully collecting 50 fragile chicken eggs.
Okay, got the visual.
If they take every single one of those delicate assets and place them into one single woven basket, they have essentially created a massive vulnerability.
They've created a single point of failure. Because if they trip over a root in the path,
the ruin is total and instantaneous.
Oh, man.
If that single basket drops, the loss isn't incremental. It isn't a 10% reduction in yield. Every single egg shatters simultaneously. They lose their entire investment of time, energy, and future capital in one split second of bad luck.
So what does this all mean for us today, operating far away from agricultural life? It is about the psychology of resource allocation when we finally decide to leave the fence. It is the warning against risking all of your capital, your emotional energy, or your professional reputation on a single, unhedged plan. A modern example is the amateur investor who takes their entire life savings and dumps it into a single, highly volatile cryptocurrency.
We've seen that happen a lot.
Right. If the market turns, they don't just take a hit, they are completely wiped out. They possess zero backup plan.
It touches on the psychological concept of loss aversion, popularized by Kahneman and Tversky. Humans feel the pain of a loss far more acutely than the joy of an equivalent gain.
So the pain of dropping the basket is huge.
Huge. The warning against putting all your eggs in one basket is a guardrail against our own blind optimism. When we stand at a crossroads, our brains sometimes become hyperfixated on the potential upside of field A.
We only see the good stuff.
We become so enamored with the best-case scenario that we commit every ounce of our being to it, ignoring the asymmetric risk. We ignore the very real possibility that field A might contain hidden pitfalls.
So diversification isn't just a financial strategy, it's a psychological survival mechanism. You apply to 5 universities, not just your dream school.
Right.
You maintain your professional network even when you love your current job. You build a side hustle before entirely abandoning your primary income.
Exactly. You engineer your life to be resilient. You maintain options so that a single localized failure doesn't cascade into absolute unrecoverable ruin.
I really appreciate how these two concepts complement each other. Drawing a line in the sand is an aggressive, outward-facing posture of boundary enforcement.
Yes, very proactive.
But refusing to put all your eggs in one basket is a defensive, inward-facing posture of asset protection. You need the aggressive boundary to force the decision, but you need the defensive diversification to ensure you survive the consequences of that decision.
They are the two necessary pillars of preparation. You dictate the terms to the world, but you protect your vulnerabilities from the world.
Yeah.
And once both are in place, the preparation phase is officially over.
Which brings us to the moment of truth. The most thrilling, terrifying part of the journey. The boundaries are drawn. The assets are protected. Now, we arrive at the precise moment of action, the actual mechanics of the jump.
This is where it gets real.
And what I find so compelling about how humans communicate this is that we don't have just one universal phrase for taking a risk. We have multiple distinct psychological flavors for taking massive action, and each one reveals a completely different internal mindset.
It really highlights the nuance of human emotion.
Let's start with the most kinetic and chaotic one, throwing caution to the wind.
This phrase is incredibly evocative because it relies on the historical and cultural associations we have with the wind. Throughout human history, the wind has represented chaos, untamable fate, and, forces entirely beyond human control.
Right, you can't steer the wind.
Exactly. Now, look at the other component, caution. Caution represents the heavy, restrictive armor we wear to protect ourselves. It is our hesitation, our safety nets, our meticulously maintained egg baskets.
So you are visualizing physically taking all of that carefully constructed armor, all of those safety mechanisms.
And instead of organizing them or relying on them, you hurl them up into a violent gust of wind, and you watch them scatter entirely out of your control.
The psychological release of that must be intoxicating.
It is the ultimate expression of liberation. But we must be clear, it is also inherently reckless. When you throw caution to the wind, you are acting boldly. Precisely because you have consciously chosen to completely ignore the consequences.
You just don't care anymore.
You are no longer engaging in a cost-benefit analysis. You have dismissed the concept of risk entirely in favor of sheer action.
It makes me think of someone who is just utterly exhausted by playing it safe, like an accountant who has spent 15 years building a perfectly secure, predictable life, and one morning they just snap.
They got enough.
Yeah, they quit their job, sell their house, and move to a small village in Italy to sculpt. They aren't checking their retirement spreadsheets anymore. They are rebelling against the tyranny of their own caution.
Rebelling is the operative word. It is an act of defiance. It is the psychological inverse of sitting on the fence.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
If the fence is total paralysis caused by overanalyzing risk, throwing caution to the wind is total motion caused by the complete rejection of risk analysis. You surrender your locus of control to the universe.
But of course, not every risk is a chaotic rebellion. Sometimes making a massive, life-altering decision isn't reckless at all. It is methodical, heavily considered, and accompanied by a very different, much quieter kind of terror.
Yes.
And that brings us to the second flavor of action, taking the plunge.
The contrast here is essential. Taking the plunge is not about ignoring fear or tossing it away. It is about confronting fear directly and absorbing it. The visual metaphor is intensely visceral.
The diving board.
Yes. You are standing barefoot on the rough, textured edge of a very high diving board. You are looking straight down into a deep pool of cold water.
You definitely aren't throwing your caution away here. Your toes are physically gripping the edge of the board. You are holding on to your fear for dear life.
Exactly. You feel every single ounce of the gravity and the risk. In this scenario, you have likely been standing on that board for an agonizingly long time.
Staring at the water.
Staring at the water. You've looked down, you have hesitated, you have calculated the distance to the water, you have felt the sympathetic nervous system spike your heart rate. You are entirely aware of the danger.
So you know exactly what you're doing.
But finally, you close your eyes, you release your physical grip on safety, and you let gravity pull you into the deep water.
This feels much more relatable to the everyday milestones we face. It's not the reckless move to Italy, it's the heavy, calculated risks. Committing to a marriage, signing a 30-year mortgage after a decade of renting.
Huge life events.
Yeah, you know exactly how heavy that debt is going to be, you know exactly how cold the water is, but you decide that the experience of swimming is ultimately worth the terror of the fall.
It is what we might call a calculated surrender. You don't deny the reality of the depth. You don't pretend the risk doesn't exist. You simply reach a point where the desire for the new reality outweighs the biological imperative to remain safe.
You let gravity take over.
You commit your physical and psychological momentum to the gravity of the choice.
So we have the chaotic, reckless rebellion of the wind, and we have the methodical, calculated surrender of the plunge. But human philosophy offers us a third flavor.
The most profound one.
And this one removes us from the physical world of wind and water entirely, plunging us straight into the existential, a leap of faith.
This phrase completely elevates the psychological stakes. The modern usage of the concept was heavily popularized by the 19th century existentialist philosopher Søren Kierkegaard.
Oh, Kierkegaard!
Yes. A leap, by its literal definition, is a massive, explosive forward jump. But this raises an important question. How does a leap of faith fundamentally differ from taking the plunge?
Well, I suppose they both involve a period of hesitation, followed by jumping into the unknown. But what's the differentiating factor?
The differentiating factor is empirical evidence. When you take the plunge off a diving board, you can at least see the water below you.
Right. You know it's there.
You know the pool exists. You might be scared of the height, but the destination is a known quantity. A leap of faith requires an entirely different cognitive mechanism. It requires profound belief in the absolute absence of evidence.
In the dark.
To take a leap of faith means you are jumping into a new reality with zero logical proof, zero historical data, and zero guarantee of success.
You literally cannot see the bottom. You don't know if you were jumping into water or a safety net or a concrete floor.
Precisely. It is the ultimate rejection of the pros and cons list we discussed at the very beginning. The rational mind cannot process a leap of faith because the variables are entirely unknown.
So what's an example of that?
If you leave a secure corporate career to start a totally unproven philanthropic charity, that is a leap of faith. You don't have a guaranteed salary. You have no data proving people will donate. You simply believe in the mission with such intensity that you hurl yourself into the void, trusting that the ground will somehow materialize beneath your feet.
You are operating entirely on trust rather than calculation.
It touches on Kierkegaard's concept of existential angst.
Huh.
The realization of our absolute freedom can be terrifying. A leap of faith requires you to trust your intuition, your spiritual beliefs, or the fundamental benevolence of the universe to catch you when rationality fails.
I want to pause the analysis here for a second and ask you, the listener, to really interrogate your own life history. Look back at the major defining crossroads you have navigated. When was the last time you took a plunge?
Think about it.
Where you stared at the frightening reality for a long time, fully calculated the cost, and finally jumped. And, well, when was the last time you took a true leap of faith? Where you jumped without being able to see the destination at all, relying entirely on belief. Which one of those internal mechanisms feels heavier to you?
It's a tough question.
Is it harder to jump when you know exactly what the terrifying reality is? Or is it harder to jump when you have absolutely no idea what is waiting for you in the dark?
It is a profound existential question. Both actions require immense courage, but they draw on entirely different psychological reserves. The plunge requires raw bravery to face a known threat.
Right.
The leap requires profound spiritual or emotional trust to face an unknowable void.
Okay, so you have made your choice. You've thrown caution to the wind, or you took the plunge, or you made the leap of faith. You are currently in midair.
The jump is happening.
The wind is rushing past your ears. You are hurtling toward your new reality. But what happens to the path you just left behind? What happens to the diving board or the safe side of the fence?
The aftermath.
This brings us to the final and unquestionably the most intense stage of human decision-making. The point of absolute irreversible commitment. Burning your bridges.
We have journeyed through agricultural metaphors and musical metaphors, but here, the language of risk turns to extreme, ancient military strategy.
Yeah, this one is dark.
The imagery is brutal and uncompromising. Visualize an ancient army. A general leads his soldiers across a massive wooden bridge, taking them deep into hostile enemy territory. And once the very last soldier's foot steps off the wood and onto the enemy soil, the general gives a shocking, almost paradoxical order. He commands his own troops to set the bridge they just crossed on fire.
My initial instinct when I hear that is to scream, "What are you doing? Like, why on earth would you intentionally destroy your only avenue of retreat?"
Because the general understands the dark, undeniable logic of human survival psychology. By setting the bridge ablaze, the general permanently and violently eliminates the physical possibility of retreat. When the soldiers turn around and see their only path home reduced to falling ash, their psychology instantly, radically shifts.
Because they realize the safety net is gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The human brain, under extreme duress, will always seek the path of least resistance. If the battle gets bloody and the bridge is still standing, the soldiers will naturally want to flee back to safety.
It's human nature.
But if the way back is ash, running away is no longer an option. They're forced to move forward. They're forced to fight with absolute desperate ferocity to secure a new home in the hostile territory because their old home is now completely inaccessible. The ashes guarantee their total commitment to forward momentum.
It is a terrifying, almost sociopathic way to engineer commitment, and it translates so directly into our modern psychological landscape. In contemporary English, burning your bridges means permanently and intentionally destroying relationships, connections, or professional opportunities.
Yes.
You behave in a way that makes it absolutely impossible for you to ever return to a previous job, a previous partnership, or a previous state of being.
And culturally, it is almost exclusively deployed as a stern warning. Whatever you do, don't burn your bridges.
Everyone says that.
The standard corporate advice is that even if you deeply despise your manager and the company culture is toxic, you should resign with perfect politeness. You smile, you offer to help with a transition, you shake hands, and you walk away gracefully.
Keep the bridge standing.
Because the logic assumes you never know when you might need a reference, or when you might cross paths with those executives again in the future. You want to leave the structural integrity of the bridge intact, just in case you ever need to walk back across it to escape a new failure.
But I want to push back on this conventional wisdom. I understand the logic of politeness. Sending an unhinged, insulting email to the entire company on your last day is generally terrible strategy.
Usually.
But if we dig into the psychology of the ancient general, is there ever a modern scenario where burning a bridge is actually a necessary and positive thing?
Let's explore that. What scenario are you envisioning?
Well, let's go back to the person taking a leap of faith into a new, risky business venture. Let's say they decide to keep their old corporate job on a part-time consulting basis, just in case the new business fails.
Oh, they're hedging their bets.
They have intentionally kept the bridge perfectly intact. But doesn't that intact bridge create a massive psychological hazard? Doesn't knowing that you can easily retreat make it too tempting to run back to safety the minute the new venture gets difficult or scary?
It creates an easy out.
Doesn't the sheer comfort of having a plan B actually guarantee that you won't fight as hard for plan A? I wonder if occasionally burning the bridge, intentionally severing ties with your safety net, is the exact psychological trigger required to ensure you don't run back to the agonizing fence we started this whole conversation on.
That is a phenomenal subversion of the idiom's typical usage. And from a behavioral economics standpoint, there's a recognized concept for this. It's called pre-commitment devices.
Pre-commitment devices.
It's the story of Ulysses tying himself to the mast so he cannot steer his ship toward the sirens. If the bridge is still standing, your brain will unconsciously allocate cognitive resources to constantly calculating the distance back to safety. The temptation of retreat divides your focus and dilutes your effort.
You are fighting a war while constantly looking over your shoulder.
Precisely. If you burn the bridge, if you boldly declare to the world, I am never returning to this industry, regardless of what happens, you are artificially inducing that ancient military survival instinct.
Wow.
You are engineering an environment where failure is no longer an option because the infrastructure for retreat has been annihilated. It is a wildly risky, high-stakes psychological strategy. But for certain personalities who know they are prone to backing down when things get tough, the smell of the smoke from their own burning bridge is the ultimate required motivator.
The smell of the smoke. I love that imagery. It's incredibly dangerous. But maybe, just maybe, it is sometimes the only way to fully honor the massive leap of faith you just took.
If we synthesize this entire linguistic and psychological journey for the listener, we witness an incredibly coherent, almost cinematic narrative of human behavior.
It really is a story.
We begin with the excruciating paralysis, cognitive dissonance, and physical discomfort of sitting on the fence. We attempt to alleviate that pain through the temporal pragmatism of crossing the bridge later, or the high-speed adaptability of playing it by ear.
Delay and flexibility.
When ambiguity must finally end, we attempt to control the external variables by drawing temporary but absolute lines in the sand, while simultaneously protecting our internal vulnerabilities by refusing to put all our eggs in one basket.
And then after all the delaying, all the adapting, and all the protecting,
We finally jump. We jump. We either throw caution to the chaotic wind in a glorious act of reckless rebellion, we take the plunge after agonizing calculations and staring down the drop, or we take a massive existential leap of faith into an unknowable void.
and then we land.
And finally, when we land on the other side, we look back and we watch the bridges burn, permanently securing our forward momentum into our new reality. These are not merely vocabulary words to be memorized for an exam. They are intricate, beautifully structured mental frameworks. They are the mechanisms native speakers use to process the anxiety, the risk, and the sheer exhilaration of navigating a complex world.
And for you, listening to this deep dive, actively integrating these highly expressive frameworks into your own vocabulary does something remarkable. It allows you to entirely transcend textbook, literal English.
You sound native.
When you deploy these phrases in conversation, you are signaling to everyone around you that you don't just possess a dictionary definition of words. You understand the profound cultural and psychological heartbeat of the language. You sound deeply sophisticated, highly fluent, and emotionally intelligent in how you deconstruct the complexities of life and business.
You are no longer just speaking English. You are speaking the shared language of the human experience.
Exactly. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on the psychology we have explored, but entirely flips the premise on its head.
I like the sound of this.
We have spent this entire hour analyzing how we use language to describe the risks we have already decided to take or the fears we already feel. But what if causality flows in the opposite direction? What if the specific imagery we choose to use actually dictates the outcome of the choice itself?
You are talking about a form of linguistic determinism? The idea that the structure of our language shapes our cognition.
Yes, think about it deeply. If you are standing at a major career crossroads and you consciously choose to visualize your next move as a terrifying plunge into deep freezing water, does that heavy, gravity-bound imagery subconsciously make you more hesitant?
It might.
Does conceptualizing it as a plunge make your toes grip the metaphorical diving board tighter, delaying the choice even longer because your brain believes it is about to experience physical trauma?
It creates a self-fulfilling psychological barrier.
Exactly. Versus, what if you actively, consciously chose to view that exact same career move as a liberating toss of caution into the wind? If you frame the exact same job change as a release of heavy armor rather than a terrifying fall, does the action suddenly become easier to execute?
That makes a lot of sense.
Does the metaphor you unconsciously lean on secretly make the decision for you before your rational brain even realizes what happened?
That is a staggering implication. If our language is a mirror for our psychology, then intentionally changing our language could theoretically alter our psychological response to fear. By changing the metaphor, you actively redraw the boundaries of the reality you are operating within. You aren't just describing your fear, you are programming it.
It is definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself staring at that blank piece of paper. The next time you are looking at that pros and cons list with the line drawn down the middle, when the paralyzing weight of a massive life choice starts to anchor you to the floor, pay very close, deliberate attention to the exact words you are using to describe your hesitation.
Listen to yourself.
Are you telling yourself you are sitting on a sharp fence, enduring the pain of indecision? Or are you telling yourself you are just listening to the music, playing it by ear until the right moment arrives? The vocabulary you choose might just be the hidden key to finally making your move. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope you walk away feeling a little more equipped to confidently and eloquently navigate your own crossroads, whichever path you ultimately choose to take. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never be afraid to jump.